Hello, hello. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. This is Loren Fogelman with Business Success Solution, and today's topic is 6/9/23, June 9th, the new deadline for accountant cybersecurity, and I am going to be talking with Andrew Lassise. I want to let you know he is the founder of Tech for Accountants. I'll go into that in just a moment, but you're in the right place if you're looking for the new cybersecurity requirements that accountants need to have in place. You want to know who is required to comply and also some cost-effective solutions. That's what we're going to be touching on today. I absolutely suggest you have pen and paper ready because Andrew is very, very generous. He shares so much, and then we'll let you know how to be able to follow up with him if that interests you after we're finished with our conversation today. Let me give you a little bit of background about Andrew. He is a self-proclaimed chief orchestrator at Tech for Accountants, which is an IT company specializing in small accounting firms. He is certified with the Florida Institute of CPAs and has become a thought leader in the data security space. If you go to LinkedIn, you can always see one of his interviews on LinkedIn posts. It's constantly in my feed. He's also an expert on IRS publications on cybersecurity and is now leading the way for helping those small firms get compliant with the FTC rules. You can learn more about Andrew and Tech for Accountants at tech, TECH, for the number 4, accountants.net. So Andrew, want to just say welcome. I am looking forward to this conversation and hearing more about 6/9/2023. But before we go into that part of it, I just want to hear about what started in 2002 and what is required right now.
Yeah, well, thank you for the introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself, right? It's really great to be here. So like you had alluded to, so the FTC safeguards rule, which now covers tax accountants, bookkeepers, and has a deadline now of 6/9/23 for everybody to be in full compliance with cybersecurity, which we'll dive into later. But the FTC safeguards rule, it started in 2002. So you look at it and, okay, this thing existed for the last 21 years. Why do they have a deadline on it now? Like, wouldn't it have happened maybe 2003, 4, 5? But now, COVID has made a giant shift to people working online, and the environments, they can be a lot less secure. So in order to protect the consumer, they're putting all these rules and regulations in place. So anyone that's handling financial data, and that falls, they specifically call out tax preparers in the list of who's required, but it's the umbrella of anyone that's handling financial information.
And when we're looking at that, it sounds like part of this is that they've been thinking about this for a long time, but really that there's so much going on with data breaches all the time, people having their information because of getting hacked into some big corporate, and that they're trying to put some things in place because when it comes to tax preparation, we're dealing with very, very sensitive information. Is that part of what motivated this?
Yeah, I mean, tax preparers are one of the most targeted professions because if you think about it, you have access to all of the information about your clients, just on a 1040, getting everybody's social security number, their address, their bank routing information. I mean, you have enough information on that basically to commit identity theft. So what the hackers have discovered is if I can breach one tax accountant, I have access to all of their clients. They're sort of they have the keys to the castle. So instead of going after the people one by one by one by one, they're just targeting, let me get a single tax accountant, and there's a big payoff on that. And, people kind of under the impression, well, I'm a small firm, I only have a handful of clients, maybe 100, 200 clients. Like, this doesn't really apply to me. But the fact of the matter is, they may not target your firm specifically, which we would call spear phishing, where you find someone like, when I say it was Deloitte, someone in Big Four, I think it was Deloitte had a data breach a couple years ago, and they were targeted specifically because they are Deloitte, right?
Mhm.
Like they knew the gigantic payoff should they get into Deloitte. They used very, very sophisticated hacks and managed to get in. They did a good job at mitigating the risk. So it wasn't like a big story in the news, but regardless, so the smaller firms, yes, you're not going to be targeted specifically you individually.
Mhm.
However, what we saw a ton of this past tax season was what the hackers would do. You know, you can buy a list, an email list of all enrolled agents, right? So you've got at your fingertips 80,000 people, enrolled agents from the IRS. So you're all tax accountants. And then they just pop it into an email and they write an email to 80,000 different firms saying, hey, I just moved to the area not too long ago, and I'm looking for someone to help me with my taxes. Here's my situation. I've got a Schedule C. I'm doing this and that. My wife, she's got two 1040s. She switched. They write a compelling
Right.
story. You know, here is something that you would get emailed from an actual prospect, right? They're not making the attack there. They're just making the introduction. So they say, is this something you could help with? And you look at it and you say, oh, great. I have someone that found me online.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. You know, it's not a word of mouth introduction, but they found me online. That makes sense. It checks out. They've got Schedule C and their wife works. And okay, you know, they just moved to the area. Cool, cool, cool. This all checks out. You know, you send your response. Hey, I would need to know this, that, and the other. You know, can you provide me last year's returns? Sure. Here you go. And they send a virus called 2022 or 2021 1040 1120, you know, whatever it is. And if you're not vigilant about it, you don't look deep into it, that file actually contains a virus and they send it over in a zip file. So everything looks to the untrained eye basically like, cool, I have a client coming in. Let me see their returns. And, you know, maybe you'd get a warning, this isn't safe. And it's like, no, this guy emailed me. I was expecting this.
Mhm.
And that's how they get in. And we saw a handful of people coming to us saying, I don't know what happened. And then, you know, we go and do the forensics and it's like, this is exactly what happened. You know, someone knocked on the door, you open the door and welcome them into your house. It's tough to protect against that unless they've got, and you know, what the FTC is putting in place now is having the type of security that would prevent things like that from happening.
Okay, so it sounds like it starts innocent enough, especially if you're getting this during tax season where you are so busy, you might not do as much diligence as you would at other times a year. What are some of the requirements for having this in place then?
So the FTC came out with 9 requirements
Mhm.
and boiling it super, super high level. You need to have a qualified individual or vendor that's overseeing the information security program, which is the ISP is sort of the high level, what you're going to need as an ISP. Here's the 9 requirements. You need to have someone qualified that's overseeing it. So it can't just be, oh, well, I've got Norton and I call myself, you know, it's like me saying I'm a tax accountant because I bought
Mhm.
QuickBooks. No, that's not how, or TurboTax. It's not how it works. Like just because you have a tool doesn't mean that you're magically qualified. And one of the
Mhm.
questions they ask is, what prior experience do they have implementing an ISP? It's like, well, I'm going to do it on my own because I don't want to pay for it,
Right,
basically.
right.
Right. So number one, appoint a qualified individual or vendor. Number 2 is conducting a risk assessment. So here you're doing an audit of what you currently have in place and basically a gap assessment of what you have and where you're vulnerable and what you need. Then number 3 on that is developing and implementing a written information security plan. So maybe people had heard like the term WISP, And that's been required since 2019. But every year we have people coming to us that noticed on their PTIN renewal form, they're like, hey, I need this now. And it's, well, you've needed it for the last 3 years, but you need it now also. And so that's one of the requirements, pointing to something else that was already required. Number 4, regularly monitoring and testing your ISP. So not only putting the pieces together in the risk assessment, but making sure that the safeguards that you put in place are actually working. And, a good question that, people listening, you don't have to answer out loud. When's the last time you actually checked if your backup was actually working and running? Because very, very often, we'll come in, someone will say, oh, well, like, here's the setup I have in place. And we look under the hood. We're like, well, you told me you have this in place, and I see that you did have it in place, but you haven't had a successful backup since 2001. Like, I agree that you have something that should be doing that, but you've never actually checked it. I'm showing you here, like, here's the last date, 2001. So monitoring and testing your ISP, then evaluating and adjusting the ISP. So seeing the vulnerabilities, looking at, and sometimes, these things can be cost prohibitive. The requirements for a firm that's doing less than 1,000 returns a year is going to be different than someone that's putting out thousands and thousands with multiple partners, things like that. So there is a degree of how much it applies and the cost effectiveness and risk reward, things that you're willing to tolerate. So for instance, you could find that the Wi-Fi on in your home office, for instance, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. Like, there's things that the FTC and IRS require, but it may not have all the bells and whistles of a $2,000 router, firewall, wireless access point. But it's like, is this a $2,000 threat for what we have in front of us? So you're evaluating and adjusting based on what makes sense for your firm and against what's just legally required. So the other piece is that qualified individual that you hired on step 1, they're required now to report to the board of directors or the owner, whatever the structure of the organization looks like, on at least an annually basis. So presenting, here's what is going on, here's what we found, here are our recommendations based on what we're currently seeing. Number 7, periodically reviewing your vendors and service providers, making sure that they are taking care of your security. So actually doing due diligence on the people who are in charge of the security, not only the qualified coordinator of your ISP, but also just, say you've got Norton. Like, why did you choose them? And right, their name's ubiquitous, and all the IT people are like cringing, but like, I chose them because they have this certification, that certification. It's a household name. I trust this brand. This is why I trust them. Versus, oh, well, I got some wacky thing off of a sketchy internet site that says it's protecting me, and it's just actually like a notepad document. We've literally seen that. Like, that's an anecdote, not an exaggeration.
I'm sure you've seen everything, Andrew. You can't make this stuff up.
You can't see everything because it blows my mind. I mean, we've had people, yeah, I paid $700 for this antivirus, and it's like, you just have a notepad that says you're protected. They're like, yeah, it was $700. Like, that's what? It's a notepad. Like, where's the file? They're like, that is the file. I'm like, that's a notepad. They typed the words, you're protected. And so much with IT, it's like, if you're not an IT professional, how are you going to know? Just like, I hire an accountant, and like, I know enough, like a slight more than maybe the average bear, but like, if someone that's a qualified individual, so an EA, CPA, I mean, even a bookkeeper saying, here is your tax liability, like, what ground do I have to stand on to say you're wrong? I know more than you.
Right.
So we see that on the tech side too, where, I look at it like, come on, you paid $700 for a notepad, but if you're not trained in this stuff, it's like, well, they said that this is legitimate and all I have to go off of is trust, which
Mm-hmm.
it's, it's difficult in an industry that's basically built on trust equity, just like the accounting profession of, everybody I talk to. It's like, do you know accountants that are terrible at what they do? And yeah, everyone knows
Right.
terrible accountants. And it's like, but the regular people that hire them don't know that they're terrible. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So reviewing your vendors, keeping your ISP current, and having a written incident response plan, which is essentially all right, I opened the email from the hacker and now things are shut down. There's ransomware on the computer. I have to pay these hackers $50,000 in Bitcoin to get my firm back. Otherwise, everything's encrypted and I've lost everything. And a situation like that is extremely stressful. And we know that we don't make good decisions as humans when we're under stress up
Mm-hmm.
against the gun. And then, afterwards we look at it and we're like, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I call the police or call a cybersecurity person? There's a whole lot of different angles that play into that. But so having that incident response plan ahead of time, so that God forbid, when something like that happens, you've at least got the steps laid out in front of you of what to do next. Instead of panic mode, I got hacked, I don't know what to do, I'll just give them $50,000 in Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully this goes away.
So I hear all the known requirements and everything. It's a lot of oversight, which I can understand, especially for the clients. They want to know that their information is protected. But it sounds like this would be really, really expensive, especially for smaller firms. So is it something that we need in place, but is cost prohibitive, especially when we're talking about the smaller firm owners?
So there's different options that are available. And when this first came to mind, this will be a shameless plug sales
Mm-hmm.
pitch. So I'll just preface
Sure.
that. But when I first read the requirements of what they're making everybody do, so like we just talked about the 9 things that are policy,
Mm-hmm.
but they dig into, you need to have this software, that software, that software, that software, that this is that and the other. And so I set out I worked backwards, and I know that for the whole shebang, easily $1,000 a month to check all the boxes in software. And so I set out in the beginning, I was like, what can I do? How can I get people compliant for $50 a month? And it was extremely difficult. But I mean, like as an IT company, we have good relationships with vendors. So one of the things that they require is something called an intrusion detection system, in IDS. And it's basically your continuous monitoring, right? The vendor we use charges $500 a month. That one checkbox, $500 a month. And especially for a smaller firm, it may not even be applicable.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's specifically pointed out that you need it. So, in putting together a $50 a month full compliance package, it was like, well, this is $500. How can we include something like that and everything else under the umbrella? But luckily, I've got really, really smart people working for me, and they figured it out, because I just told them, like the Apollo 13. It's like, we need to
Mm-hmm.
make a like an oxygen tank with like, here's the junk that they have on the ship, like make it, right? And like they made it and got it to work, right? And so this is sort of the same thing of, here's what we have available. It needs to cost less than $50 a month, and we need to have margins in it too. So I mean, we spent the last 2 months developing this thing that is going to give people full compliance. And $50 a month, it's not everyone's favorite price, but it's a whole lot better than $1,000 a
Oh,
month.
absolutely. And it's a lot better than if you end up being a victim of one of these breaches.
Yeah, I have a
and
whole
what could
webinar on
happen
saving
then.
$1 million
So,
by not being a
yeah,
victim. But
don't even want to go there. Okay, so then I hear that it sounds like it applies to everybody that is doing tax preparation specifically. So if someone says, oh, I'm just a solo, I only do 200 tax returns a year, but they get singled out for whatever reason, are there penalties, or what would be the penalties for not being compliant?
yeah, the penalty for not being compliant can be up to $43,000
Mhm.
per record that's breached. So quick math, 43,000 times 200. So that's an $8.6 million breach. And okay, are they going to charge a solo person doing 200 returns $8.6 million? Probably not to the full extent of the law,
Mhm.
but there is also suppose you had the risk assessment, you were aware of the vulnerabilities, and then something happened, and then you can fall into like the willful negligence. And there was a case in New York where a firm, they had a risk assessment done, and they were aware of the vulnerabilities that they had. They didn't do anything about it. They got hacked as a result of one of the vulnerabilities. And subsequently, one of their clients was a medical firm. And that medical firm, because the accounting firm had access to the medical firm, like, they just had a team viewer or something insecure to be able to access their books or whatever their detail was. The medical center has a data breach falling under HIPAA, and all of their
Right.
patients filed a class action lawsuit, not against the medical center, but class action lawsuit against the firm that started the breach. So you've got not only your direct clients to protect, but also if you have any sort of access to their customers. So the threshold is 5,000 records, but those 5,000 records, if you have 100 clients and each of those clients
Mhm.
has 50 customers, you're there.
Right.
So it's the math, really, it hits 5,000. The people that really this wouldn't apply to, it would be the firms that I'm winding down, I'm retired, I do 20 returns a year for friends and family. They're not business owners. Those would be the people, and they have a separate set of requirements for the less than 5,000 access records. But even that's got it on the IT side. It's like, I get it. I support people having good protection
Mhm.
because I've seen, just by virtue of what I see, I've seen people just get demolished by these things. So I see it on a daily basis. So-and-so fell for this, let them in that way, overruled this that they shouldn't have, gave this person control they thought they could trust, yada, yada, yada. So even the small firms, they still have requirements. It just isn't as stringent, but usually the ones that would fall in there would be the I'm retiring, I only do friends and family. And if you take away my P10, it doesn't even affect me at this point.
Mhm. But basically, it sounds to me like this is just one of those things that you have, like your E&O insurance, and it's the cost of doing business, where you want to have it in place, but you hope to never have to access it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's E&O with some actual value attached to it, even if you don't use it, because part of the reporting is on the provider side. We have to be
Mhm.
giving our clients reports of what we're actually doing on the back end. So, I mean, on my side, flip the script. I had a person doing my books for years, and now I have processes in place to stop this exact thing from happening. But I was paying him every month, but he wasn't actually doing my books, and I didn't have checking my books as part of my just weekly checklist of things that I
Mhm.
do. And, I come to find out he didn't do them. And then my numbers were completely off, threw in a journal entry, called it a day. And I eventually figured it out. I'm like, why does this credit card always get charged twice? And why are you treating it like it got charged twice? Like, I'm no accountant, but this seems like
Right.
something you should notice, that every single transaction in here has two charges. Like, shouldn't, like, it stands out to
Mhm.
me. I
Right.
know I only did it once, and I would, it's like, would I charge every single transaction ever twice on the same? That's silly, but I didn't have a due diligence on my provider at the time. So unfortunately falls down on me. So whereas E&O, like, you won't find out if your coverage actually works until you need to use your E&O, which, fingers crossed it all works out. But at least on the IT side, we're providing reports every single month of,
Mhm.
here are all the vulnerabilities that we patched on your behalf, because continuous monitoring is one of the requirements. So we're not only monitoring and recognizing, here are, it's basically like bank recs, but for your computer. And it's just, here's all of the transactions that weren't reconciled, and
Sure.
we reconciled them for you.
Basically, you're doing the oversight.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So that was the goal when we put everything together, is still have everything that people need to have. And, the tech side of me, it's like, well, we could also add this bell and whistle and add that bell and whistle. And it's like, if people are just looking to comply with another government thing that they're forcing people to do, they're probably not in the headspace. And we do have the ability, if you would like, to add this,
Mhm.
you could upgrade that. But here is the box. The government wants you, for better or worse, to fit into this box. And I talk with like other IT providers. I was like, this is what we did, in $50 a month. They're like, how do you just do you just pay out of pocket to get new customers? Like, what's your loss leader is like a gigantic loss. It's like, I know, but we've got some smart people that figured out ways
Mhm.
to get this done. So there's a lot in there. But yeah, getting on the E&O, it's like, yep, you got E&O. You
Yep.
paid for it. Hopefully you don't need it. And this, it's, yeah, hopefully you don't need it, but there's always going to be vulnerabilities on your system that need to get patched.
Mhm.
So you're at least getting a report of, here is what actually happened.
And I understand tax preparers wanting to have the cybersecurity top of mind, because it's their entire business is on their computer. Where if that is vulnerable, then it puts their entire business livelihood, as well as who they're employing, they're taking care of, at risk. So if somebody is looking to get on this sooner as opposed to later, they want the peace of mind that they have this in place. How do they get started and tackle this to be able to have it in place and
Yeah.
know that they're not at risk?
So I spent the last month putting together a guide for people they can download for free. So if they go to techforaccountants.net, and that's the number 4/BSS. So for anyone, that's listening to this or watches it on a replay, techforaccountants.net/BSS, and you can download the guide. And I did my absolute best to make it speak English, but I just, being a
Mhm.
tech person, and because of the data that we have access to, we are a spear phishing target, because it's like, well, you have access to thousands and thousands of accountants, who then have access to thousands and thousands of their clients, and then thousands and thousands of their own customers. So I mean, we're kind of like top of the food chain. And so even though we weren't specifically listed as someone that's required to do this, we made sure that we were fully compliant with all these requirements too, which, and I mean, we only have 14 full-time employees. The amount of work that went into getting our own firm as an IT firm that already had a lot of cybersecurity in place, all the HIPAA, PCI,
Right.
IRS things. So already having a lot in place. And then here's a new one. And while we're not specifically called out, we made sure that, we take our own medicine, right? And it was a lot of work. So I tried to make the guide
Mm-hmm.
as simple as possible, but it's kind of like, can you simplify all tax code for for the layman? And it's like, I mean, I can give you like an overview, but it's not as big as the tax code, but I mean, it's hundreds of pages of regulation. It's all gibberish to non-tech people. Even me, I'm like, what's that?
So Andrew, I just want to say, I think that whatever you put in the guide will be of value. If anybody is listening, it can be found at tech4accountants.net/VSS. Some of the things that we did cover today is those new cybersecurity requirements, who's required to comply, and most importantly, the cost-effective solutions. If somebody wanted to reach out and speak with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Tech4accountants.net, and you could go through the contact form, or if they look up Andrew Lassise on LinkedIn, like you said, I've got videos all the time. Like I try to stay off of LinkedIn. I have a VA that's just making sure that we're putting out content constantly. And so if you message me on LinkedIn, she will let me know that it's a real person, and not like, hey, have you, I noticed that you live in South Florida. Would you like an estimate on the value of your roof? Blah, blah, blah. Like, it's like, man, at least qualify who you're talking to.
Andrew, I just want to say thank you so much for the engaging conversation. I learn from you every single time that we meet. I also want to thank everybody that has been listening to our conversation today. This is Loren Fogelman with Business Success Solution, showing accounting professionals how to double their income working half the time. Talk to you soon.